My daughter was fighting for her life, but my wife and her mother were planning a party. When I refused to leave the hospital, they said I was overreacting. Then my daughter opened her eyes and said, "Daddy, they did this." I felt my blood freeze. But before I begin, please like and subscribe to the channel. And we'd love to hear which part of the world are you joining us from. Let us know. Now, let's dive into today's story. Michael Carver had not slept in 2 days. He sat in a hard plastic chair beside his daughter's bed, elbows on his knees, hands folded the way a man folds them when he has run out of things to do with them. The chair was the kind that was designed to be functional and nothing else, rigid, cold at the edges, no give whatsoever. He had stopped noticing it sometime around midnight. The room smelled of antiseptic and recycled air, and the lights were the low, blue-tinted kind that hospitals keep on at night, so nothing looks quite right. Machines beeped in a slow, steady rhythm beside the bed. He had learned to read the numbers on the monitor over the past 2 days, not because anyone had taught him, but because he had sat here long enough to understand what the patterns meant. Normal, stable, holding. He watched them the way a man watches a gauge on a machine he doesn't fully trust. Maisie was 7 years old. She lay under a thin hospital blanket, her face pale, her small chest rising and falling with a faint wheeze that had not been there before. And 4-line ran from the back of her tiny hand, taped down carefully so she wouldn't pull it loose in her sleep. Her dark hair had been pushed to one side by a nurse, and it spread across the pillow in a way that reached somewhere deep inside him, because she slept exactly like that at home. Sunday mornings when she crawled into their bed at dawn and fell back asleep between him and Lorna, dark hair fanned out on the pillow, completely at ease, completely trusting. He looked away. The doctors had used words like gastric distress and possible ingestion, and we are still running tests. They had spoken carefully, the way doctors speak when they don't yet want to commit to what they are thinking. Michael had listened to every word. He had asked every question he knew how to ask. He had been sitting here long enough to understand that soon, when a doctor said it, meant nothing at all. On the far side of the room, near the window, his wife Lorna stood with her back half turned to the bed. Her phone was pressed to her cheek. Her voice was low but not low enough. "Just tell them dinner is at 7, she was saying. "We are not canceling." Michael watched her. Beside Lorna, her mother Dolores Pike stood with her arms folded across her chest, nodding along. Dolores was a large woman with a hard jaw and the particular posture of someone who had arranged her life to her satisfaction and resented anyone who suggested that arrangement needed adjusting. She had never made much secret of the fact that she found Michael ordinary. He was a construction foreman, a man who worked with his hands and came home with dirt under his fingernails and did not earn what Dolores thought her daughter deserved. She had implied it for 15 years in the way certain people do, not with words, but with the way they looked at a room when they entered it, as though taking inventory and finding it short. Michael had absorbed it all without comment. He was good at absorbing things quietly. "You're planning something right now?" he said. His voice was low even. 15 years on construction sites had given him a voice that didn't need volume to carry weight. Lorna turned. She didn't look alarmed. She didn't look guilty. She looked like a woman who had been interrupted during something she considered important. "It's just people coming over," she said. "We can't cancel on everyone. Our daughter almost died." The words dropped into the room and sat there. Lorna's expression shifted slightly, not toward grief, toward something closer to impatience. Dolores unfolded her arms long enough to wave a hand dismissively. "Kids get sick. It happens. You're acting like the sky fell." Michael stared at her. He had been in construction long enough to know there were 2 types of problems on any job. The first kind announced themselves, a crack in a beam, a wall that shifted, a sound that didn't belong. Those were manageable because you could see them. The second kind were the quiet ones. The problems that looked stable right up until the moment they weren't. Those were always worse because by the time you noticed them, the damage had already happened beneath the surface. Something in this room felt like the second kind. He turned back to Maisie. He took her small hand in both of his. He said nothing else, but his mind was already working. 2 nights before Maisie was admitted to the hospital, she had sat at the kitchen table after dinner, pressing her palm flat against her stomach with the careful, deliberate way children do when they don't understand why something hurts. "My tummy," she had said. Lorna had been stacking dishes in the sink with her back to the room. "She ate too much, Michael. You know how she is. She barely touched her plate at dinner," he said, "because she was over at Mom's all afternoon. She probably snacked the whole time." He had crouched beside Maisie's chair and asked her where it hurt, and she had pressed her palm harder and said here, right here, and he had carried her to bed and sat beside her until the stomach ache seemed to ease and her breathing deepened and she drifted into sleep. He had been half asleep himself when she spoke. Her voice came out small and loose, the way children talk when they're almost already gone. "Grandma made me a special drink," she said. Michael had opened his eyes. "What kind of drink?" he asked. She said it was vitamins, but it tasted weird. Weird how? But Maisie was asleep. He had lain there in the dark and told himself it was one of Dolores's herbal things. The woman had a shelf full of supplements and an evangelical certainty about each one. She gave them to everyone, neighbors, the mail carrier, anyone who stood still long enough. It was probably one of those. It was probably nothing. He had told himself that. Now, sitting beside the hospital bed in the early morning, those words kept coming back. Not loudly, not with any particular urgency, just present, the way a sound stays in a room after the source of it is gone. He kept turning them over. A special drink. Something in him would not let it rest. It was close to 3 a.m. when Maisie stirred. Her fingers moved first, a small twitch in his hand. Then her head turned on the pillow, slowly, toward him. Michael leaned forward. Lorna had stepped out of the room more than an hour ago, saying she needed coffee. She had not come back. The room was quiet except for the monitors. "Hey, Peanut," he said softly. Her eyes opened halfway. In a low light, they were glassy and unfocused at first. She blinked once, twice, like someone trying to place themselves. Then she found him. "Daddy." "Right here," he said. "I'm not going anywhere." She looked at the ceiling for a moment, then back at him. Something moved behind her eyes, a troubled, careful thing, the expression she made when she knew she was supposed to say something but didn't know if she was allowed. He recognized it immediately. He had seen it before, over small things. Broken toys. Accidents she was afraid to confess. This did not look like a small thing. "Daddy." She swallowed carefully like swallowing hurt. "What is it, baby?" Her fingers tightened around his slightly. "Mom and Grandma," she started. Then she stopped. Her chin moved, just barely. "What about them?" he asked. He kept his voice easy and low, the way he talked to her when something was wrong and he needed her to keep talking. "They told me not to tell." The beeping of the monitors filled the room. Michael sat very still. "Not to tell what?" he asked. She looked at him with eyes that were too careful for a 7-year-old. "The drink. They said it would help me sleep better." She paused. "They said it was a secret." Her eyes closed again, and she was asleep almost immediately. The sudden, deep sleep of children who are sick, the kind that claims them between one breath and the next. Michael did not move. He sat in the chair beside her bed and listened to the monitor count her heartbeats. 62, 63, 62. He looked at her small face on the pillow. He looked at the 4 in her hand. He looked at the gray stuffed rabbit propped in the corner of the chair that he had brought from home. Something inside him had been uneasy and shifting for 2 days. It settled now, the way a load settles when it finds solid ground. Not panic, not grief. Something harder and quieter. Something that moved like the slow, deliberate formation of a decision that had already been made somewhere beneath the level of thought. He thought about Lorna by the window, planning dinner. He thought about Dolores waving her hand like this was all an inconvenience. He thought about a small girl who had been told to keep a secret. He did not leave the room that night. But by the time the first gray light came through the window and the day shift nurses began their rotations and Maisie's breathing settled into something steadier, Michael Carver knew that everything had changed. He just didn't yet know the full shape of what it had changed into. The next morning came gray and still, the kind of Oklahoma morning where the sky looks like it hasn't made up its mind about anything. Michael had spent the night in the plastic chair, dozing in short pieces, waking each time Maisie shifted or the monitors changed pitch. By 6 in the morning, Lorna had returned. She came in carrying a coffee she'd gotten somewhere, wearing fresh clothes, her hair pulled back. She looked like a woman who had slept. Michael registered this without comment. "How was she?" Lorna asked. "Stable," he said. He stood up from the chair, stretched his neck once, and said, "I need to run home. Grab some clothes for me and her rabbit. She's been asking for it." Lorna looked at him. Something moved across her face. Fast, small, almost nothing. "Right now?" "Yeah," he said. She nodded. "I'll be here. Call if anything changes." He bent and pressed his lips to the top of Maisie's head. Her hair smelled of hospital, a thin, sterile smell that didn't belong on child. He straightened and walked out without looking at Lorna again. The drive home took 20 minutes. Quiet streets, neighbors out with dogs, a school bus idling at the corner. The suburb doing exactly what suburbs do in the morning, going through the motions of ordinary life with complete indifference to whatever was happening inside any particular house. Michael parked in the driveway and sat in the truck for a moment. The house looked the same as it always did. Pale yellow siding, a front porch with 2 chairs on it that they rarely used, the window box that Lorna had planted in the spring and which hadn't been watered in weeks. Ordinary. Familiar. He went inside. The air was different. Not dramatically, not the way a smell is different when something is rotten, or the way a room is different when it has been ransacked. Subtly different. Something floral. A candle, maybe, or an air freshener. And beneath that, the particular clean smell of a house that has been recently and deliberately tidied. Not the cleaning of a distracted household running in and out during a crisis. Something more prepared, more intentional. He stood in the hallway and looked around for a moment. Then he went to the kitchen. The kitchen was spotless. That alone was enough to stop him in the doorway. Maisie was a child who left evidence of her existence on every surface. Marker caps without markers, cracker wrappers, juice rings on the wood, small sock footprints on the tile near the stove. Lorna tolerated it the way she tolerated most domestic inconveniences, with a quiet resentment of someone who expected better and had given up asking for it. She did not clean immediately or often, but the kitchen was clean now. Wiped down. Clear. The kind of clean that requires actual effort. Michael opened the refrigerator. It was stocked more fully than usual. Covered dishes, labeled containers, the kind of preparation you do when you're expecting people. He scanned the shelves. He found what he was looking for on the second shelf. A small plastic container, square and clear, sealed with a red lid. A strip of masking tape on the front, written in Dolores's large, looping handwriting. Maisie, bedtime juice. Michael stood with his hand on the container and looked at it. He peeled back the lid slowly. The smell reached him before he brought it close. Something sweet on the surface, the kind of sweetness designed to cover something else. Beneath it, underneath the fruit flavor, was something sharper, something chemical, a bitterness that did not belong in anything made for a child. He poured a small amount into a glass on the counter. He noted the color, the faint cloudiness, the way it settled slightly at the bottom. Then he sealed the container again and put it back exactly as he had found it. He went to the trash can under the sink. The bag was tied already, which was wrong. It was half full of most, tied off early, as though someone had decided to close it before it was full and not thought too hard about whether that was noticeable. He pulled the bag open. Near the bottom, wrapped loosely in a paper towel, was a small glass bottle, small enough to fit in a closed hand. The label had been scratched off, not peeled, scratched with something sharp. The paper had been worked at in patches, the way you scratch at something when you're in a hurry and not being careful. But not carefully enough. In the bottom corner, a thin strip of label remained where the scratching had missed. Michael held it under the kitchen light and brought it close. He could make out part of a word he didn't recognize, a medication name, truncated. But below that, in smaller text, 2 things were still legible. A dosage warning, and a classification in small print, for adult use only, not for use in children under 12. Michael set the bottle on the counter beside the glass. He stood in the quiet kitchen and breathed. In out, slow and deliberate. Not because he was trying to calm himself. He was already calm. Because he was taking stock. Because he needed to be precise about this. He found 2 freezer bags under the sink and placed the container in one, the bottle in the other. He sealed them both. Then he carried them to the truck and put them in the glove compartment. Then he went back inside and opened his laptop. Michael sat at the kitchen table with the laptop open in front of him. He had not checked their joint bank account in months. That had been intentional. Not because he was careless with money, but because he had trusted Lorna with the finances the same way she had trusted him with the house. A division of labor that had seemed practical once. In the early days when division of labor was just 2 people figuring out how to share a life efficiently. He logged in now. At first, it looked like what it always looked like. Utility payments, the car payment, grocery charges at familiar stores. The kinds of transactions that line up week after week until they stop registering as anything other than background noise. He filtered by recipient. He filtered by amount and sorted by frequency. There they were. Small transfers, irregular amounts, never round numbers, never large enough to raise a flag at a casual glance. $140 one week, $210 the next. Sometimes more, sometimes less, but always small, always spaced out, always going to the same account. He clicked on the account name. Travis Hale. Michael looked at the name on the screen for a long moment. He had never heard it before. He closed the laptop slowly, carefully, the way you close something when you want to be deliberate about it. He sat with his hands flat on the table and looked at the clean kitchen around him, at the container back on the refrigerator shelf, at the empty counter, at the window above the sink that looked out on a backyard with a rusted swing set that Maisie had stopped using a year ago because she said it was for babies. Travis Hale. He reached for his phone. Caleb Rourke had known Michael since they were 17 years old. They had grown up 2 streets apart, played on the same baseball team for 2 summers, and drifted into different lives with the easy, unforced continuity of old friends who don't need proximity to maintain a connection. Caleb ran an auto shop on the east side of town. He was the kind of man who knew everyone, remembered everything, and understood without being told that some information was to be offered freely and some was best kept quiet. Michael called him from the truck, parked in the driveway. Need a name run? Michael said. Go ahead. Travis Hale. Live somewhere outside town, I think. Caleb's tone stayed even. Give you a couple hours. Michael went back inside and moved through the house with purpose. He packed a bag for himself. 3 days of clothes, his phone charger. He found Maisie's gray stuffed rabbit under her bed where it had fallen in the rush of the first night. He tucked it under his arm. Before he left, he stood in the doorway of Maisie's room. It was exactly as she had left it. Drawings tacked to the wall in uneven rows, some centered, some at angles, all of them hers. Crayon horses, stick figure families, a large yellow sun over a green hill that she was very proud of and had told him represented their backyard. Her bookshelf held 17 books, all of them facing outward so she could see the covers. She arranged it that way herself. She liked to see things properly. He looked at the room for a moment. Then he turned off the light and left. Caleb called back an hour and 10 minutes later, while Michael was in the hospital parking lot. You sure you want this? Caleb asked. Tell me. Travis Hale, 34. Property on an unpaved road about 12 miles outside the city limits. Worked in property sales, the kind of commission-based work that didn't require a fixed address or a regular schedule. Kept himself. And according to 3 separate people Caleb had spoken to, people whose names Caleb didn't offer and Michael didn't ask for, Travis Hale had been seeing a married woman for some time. Name, Michael said. There was a pause on the other end. Lorna, Caleb said. Michael sat in the truck and looked through the windshield at the hospital entrance. An ambulance was pulling out. Lights off. No emergency. Ordinary. Routine. How long? He asked. People say at least a year. Could be longer. Michael said nothing. Mike, Caleb said. I'm here. What do you need? Nothing yet, Michael said. I'll be in touch. He ended the call. He set the phone on the seat. He sat in the truck in the parking lot of the hospital where his daughter was lying in a bed with an IV in her hand, and he did not move for a while. A year, at minimum. He thought about the clean kitchen, the full refrigerator, the container with Maisie's name on it, the bottle with the scratch label. He thought about Travis Hale, 12 miles outside town on an unmarked road. He got out of the truck and went back into the hospital. He did not go to Maisie's room right away. He found a night nurse, a woman named Brenda, solid and unhurried, the kind of person who had done this work long enough to tell the difference between a worried father and a man looking for something specific. He had spoken to her a few times over the past 2 days and had formed the impression that she said what was true. He pulled her aside near the nurse's station. "My wife," he said quietly. "Has she asked about paperwork, documentation, insurance?" Brenda looked at him. He could see her deciding something. "She came to the desk yesterday morning," Brenda said. "She asked about patient records. What gets documented? What goes on the official file?" A pause. "She also asked what the procedure would be if," her words, "if things took a turn." Michael thanked her and stepped away. He found a corner near a stairwell, out of the main corridor. He stood against the wall and called the insurance company. He was on hold for 12 minutes. He stood without moving and waited. The representative who came on was careful with her words, the particular carefulness of someone navigating a situation they had not expected. A policy had been issued on Maisie. 2 months ago, primary beneficiary, Lorna Carver. Secondary, Dolores Pike. Michael stood in the stairwell with his phone against his ear and his free hand flat against the cold concrete wall. He let the information settle. The drink, the bottle, the transfers to Travis Hale, the insurance policy. Lorna at the nurse's station asking what happens when things take a turn. This was not reckless. It was not impulsive. Someone had planned this. Someone had laid out in steps and followed each one. He opened his eyes. He called a lawyer named Dennis Ortega, a number he had saved after a job dispute 2 years ago and never used. He explained what he knew in plain, factual language. The drink and the bottle. The account transfers. The insurance policy. Maisie in the hospital. Dennis listened without interrupting. When Michael finished, there were 2 seconds of silence. "Do not confront anyone," Dennis said. "Do not move anything. Do exactly what I tell you. Can you do that?" "Yes," Michael said. "Good. Here's what we're going to do." Michael listened. He stood in the stairwell with his back straight against the cold wall, and he listened to every word. 3 days passed. Michael did what Dennis told him to do. He went back to Maisie's room. He sat beside her. He brought the gray stuffed rabbit and watched her face when she recognized it. Watched the careful blankness she had been wearing break open into something closer to ordinary, and he felt the sharp, particular relief of a father who has been given back one small normal thing. He smiled when she looked at him. He answered her questions. When could she go home? Would she miss too much school? Could they get a dog? Did the neighbor's cat miss her? Was he eating enough because he looked tired? He answered each one. "You're kind of a lot," he told her. "You're kind of a lot," she said back, very seriously. He smiled and looked at the window, so she wouldn't see the full weight of it. Beneath all of it, beneath the smiles and the patient answers and the cups of bad vending machine coffee, something cold and fully settled moved through him. Like bedrock, it didn't shift. It didn't waver. He kept it exactly where it was. The lab results had come back on the 2nd day. Dennis had called him from the parking lot so Michael could step away from the room. "Diphenhydramine," Dennis said. "High concentration, 4 to 5 times the recommended adult dose, mixed into a small volume of liquid." Michael was quiet. "That's an antihistamine," he said. "It is. In those amounts, in a child Maisie's weight, you're looking at severe sedation, cardiac effects, respiratory impact. The lab report characterizes it as consistent with intentional administration. They will testify to that. The insurance policy. Documented. 2 months old. No prior policies existed on Maisie. And I've traced the financial transfers. They correlate with a specific sequence. 3 days before the policy was filed, she transferred $700 to Travis Hale's account. Michael processed this. Law enforcement is aware, Dennis continued. They have reviewed what I've given them. They're ready to move when the time is right. I need you to get both of them into that room. I can do that, Michael said. On the 3rd day, he found Lorna alone in Maisie's room during a window when Dolores had gone to get food. Lorna was by the window, phone in hand, scrolling. Michael came in and stood near the foot of the bed. Doctors said she might turn the corner today, he said. Really wake up, be able to talk properly. Lorna's head came up. The movement was fast, faster than a mother who had been managing a recovering child for 3 days should have moved. There was a sharpness in her expression that had nothing to do with relief. "Today," she said. "Kabi said. She asked for you this morning, before you came in." He watched Lorna's gaze go to Maisie, sleeping at that moment, and then back to him. "She hasn't said anything?" Lorna asked. "She's been so confused." "She's getting clearer," Michael said simply. He watched Lorna reach in her pocket and pull out her phone. She held it angled away from him, the way people do when they're aware of being observed. "She said she wanted to see you and your mother both," he added. "Together. I'll let Mom know," Lorna said. "Of course," he said. He turned to look out the window at the parking lot below. He stood there while she texted, while her fingers moved on the screen behind him, while she sent whatever she sent to whoever she sent it to. He counted slowly in his chest. He breathed. By the time he turned back around, she had put the phone away and was arranging herself near the window again with the particular composure of a woman who believed she was still in control of the situation. He almost admired the nerve of it. Almost. He called Lorna at 8 the following morning. "She's awake," he said. "Really awake. The doctor wants the family together. Come now. Is she okay?" Lorna's voice came through steady, measured. "She's better. Come." He sat beside Maisie's bed. She was sitting up, propped against two pillows, eyes clear for the first time in days. The color had come back in her cheeks, not completely, but enough. A nurse had brought her orange juice and a small cup of applesauce, and she was working through it in the careful, assessing way she ate things she wasn't sure about. "This tastes like nothing," she told him. "Hospital applesauce always tastes like nothing," he said. "Even the really good hospitals? There is no good hospital applesauce." She nodded, accepting this as fact, and kept eating. He had spoken earlier that morning with Detective Pierce, a woman in her 40s, quiet-voiced, with the unhurried manner of someone who had been in this kind of situation many times and understood exactly what it required. She had reviewed the lab report, the insurance documents, the bank transfer records, and the phone records that law enforcement had extracted from Lorna's carrier under warrant. She had looked at all of it without expression, which Michael took as a good sign. 2 officers would be in the hallway. Pierce would enter when Michael gave her the signal, a call to her cell, a single ring. He stood by the door when Lorna arrived, Dolores just behind her. They moved together through the doorway the way they always moved, side by side, with the unconscious coordination of 2 people who had spent years reinforcing each other. Lorna went to the bed immediately. She bent toward Maisie, and her voice went bright and soft. "Hey, baby girl, look how good you look." Maisie looked up at her with eyes that held something complicated in them. A child's face trying to manage something too large for it. She found a small smile and said, "Hi, Mom." Dolores moved to the foot of the bed. "Good to see some color in those cheeks." Her voice was warm. It was a very good imitation of a woman without anything to hide. Michael moved away from the door. He reached into his jacket pocket. 1 ring. He kept the call short. He crossed his arms and waited. The door opened 90 seconds later. Detective Pierce came in first. Badge on her belt, plain clothes, no announcement. Behind her came 2 uniformed officers. The room changed the moment they entered it. The air tightened. The temperature felt different, and Michael watched Lorna's face as she processed what she was seeing. For half a second, her expression went blank. Then it shifted into something controlled. "What is this?" she asked. Michael stepped to the small table beside the bed. He set the sealed evidence bag on it, the container inside it. He let it sit there. "Tell them what's in the juice," he said. The container in the fridge with her name on it. The room was completely silent. Dolores gripped the bed frame. "This is insane." "And the bottle in the trash," Michael continued. "The label scratched off, but not quite clean enough." He paused. "The life insurance policy you took out on our 7-year-old daughter 2 months ago. Yourself as primary. Your mother as secondary." He looked at Lorna. "And Travis." The color left her face. Not gradually. All at once. She looked at him across the room, and something in her expression cracked open. Not into guilt, not into shame, but into something past those things. The look of a person who has been seen completely and has understood in the same moment that there is nowhere left to go. Pierce stepped forward. "Mrs. Carver, I need you to come with us." "My mother had nothing, Mrs. Pike." Pierce turned. You as well. Dolores opened her mouth. One of the officers stepped between her and the bed before she could say what she was preparing to say. Michael moved. He positioned himself on the other side of Maisie's bed, between her and the door, between her and the movement in the room. He kept his face calm. He kept his body between his daughter and the thing that was happening, so that she would not have to see all of it, even if she could hear it. He heard Maisie's plastic spoon tap against the applesauce cup and stop. "Daddy," she said quietly. "It's okay," he said, without turning around. "Eat your applesauce." A pause. Then the tapping resumed. They were at the door when Lorna stopped. The officer behind her paused. Pierce looked back. Lorna had turned to face the room again, one hand partly raised, not quite reaching for anything. Her posture had changed. The architecture she had built over years, the composed, arranged quality of a woman who managed her surroundings, had come apart. What was underneath, it was harder to read. Not remorse, not devastation. Something more like a structure after its framework has been removed. Still standing, but differently. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she said. Her voice came out thin. "I need you to know that." Michael looked at her. He gave her nothing. "But you still did it," he said. Her jaw tightened. Her lips pressed together. Dolores stepped in from the side, and even now, even here, her voice carried the edge of a woman who had spent her whole life pushing forward regardless of the direction. It was supposed to be small doses. Just enough to... She stopped herself. Just enough to do what? She couldn't finish it either. "That's enough," one of the officers said firmly, his hand on Dolores's arm. Michael's jaw was locked. His hands were at his sides, completely still. He was aware of Maisie behind him, the small sounds of her moving on the bed, the faint noise of the spoon against the cup. He kept his voice controlled. "Just enough for what?" he said. He said it slowly. He said it so that both of them could hear themselves reflected in the silence that followed. He said it because they needed to stand in this room, 10 feet from the child they had harmed, and feel the full weight of the thing they had been about to say. Dolores's mouth snapped shut. Pierce gave Michael a brief, measured look. He read it. He stepped back. The rights were read in the hallway. Michael stood facing Maisie's bed, listening to the sounds through the gap in the door, the flat, formal cadences of that process, the words that had been said so many times they had been worn smooth. He did not turn to watch. When the sounds receded down the hallway, he sat on the edge of Maisie's bed. She was looking at him. "Where did Mom go?" she asked. He thought about how to answer. He thought about what a 7-year-old could hold, and what she couldn't, and where the line was between honesty and cruelty. "She had to go with those people for a while," he said. "The police people?" "Yeah." She looked at her hands. "Is it because of the drink?" she asked. He met her eyes. "Yeah," he said. "It is." She was quiet for a moment. "I didn't want to tell," she said softly. "I know. They said not to. I know, baby. You didn't do anything wrong. None of this is your fault. Do you understand that?" She looked at him for a long time. Then she nodded. It was a slow, considered nod, the kind that means the person is working through something, not just agreeing to make you feel better. He put his arm around her. She leaned into him, and he felt the small, solid weight of her against his side. He sat with his daughter in the hospital room, and he held on, quietly, without words, until the sounds in the hallway had faded completely away. Pierce came back to the doorway 10 minutes later. She stood just inside the room and kept her voice low enough that Maisie wouldn't hear clearly. "She wants to speak with you," Pierce said. Requested it specifically. Michael looked at Maisie. She had gone back to her applesauce, but her eyes were moving across the room with the quiet attention of a child who was listening to everything. He asked the nurse at the door if she could sit with Maisie for a few minutes. He stepped into the hallway. Lorna stood 10 feet away with an officer on each side of her and her wrists held loosely forward. The handcuffs were not yet on, but the intention was clear. She looked smaller out here. The fluorescent light in the hallway was not kind to anyone, and she was no exception. She looked at him with an expression he had not seen on her in 15 years. The managed composure was completely gone. What was left was something more fundamental, something underneath the layers of presentation. Not softness, not grief, but a particular kind of bareness. A person stripped of the performance they had been giving. You think this was just about the money, she said. Her voice was low, almost conversational, as though they were in a room together, alone, having a discussion they had been postponing. Michael looked at her without expression. The policy, she continued. You think that was the whole of it? He waited. He was very good at waiting. Travis didn't want a child in the picture. She said it plainly, the way you say a fact you have already made your peace with. He was clear about that from early on. He said it would be easier if, she stopped. She couldn't finish the sentence. She looked at the floor. Michael stood and absorbed what she had not said. Travis Hale had looked at Michael's daughter and called her an obstacle. He had decided she was a problem to be removed, the way you remove something inconvenient from a room to make the room easier to be in. And Lorna, after 15 years after a house and a marriage and a child in 15 years, had looked at Maisie and decided she agreed. Not reluctantly, not under some sustained pressure that broke her down until she couldn't see clearly. She had agreed. She had bought the policy. She had handed the container to her daughter and told her it would help her sleep. Michael had spent 2 days preparing for the hot, consuming kind of rage. He had expected it now. In this hallway, looking at this woman, he had thought it would come. What came instead was colder, deeper and quieter and more permanent. A clarity so complete it had no edges. He looked at her for a long moment. He let her see that he understood everything, not just what she had done, but what she was and what she had been willing to do, and the fact that there was not a single version of any story in which that became something he would ever find a way around. Then he turned and walked back into the room. He did not look at her again. The weeks following were not dramatic. That was the thing about the end of something rotten. It rarely came apart with a crash. It came apart with paperwork, with court dates, with phone calls from Dennis Ortega, impatient, even language that Michael listened to at the kitchen table of the new place with a cup of coffee going cold beside him. The charges moved quickly, administering a harmful substance to a minor, insurance fraud, conspiracy, attempted murder, which Dennis said was the most significant charge and the hardest to establish, but not impossible, because they had the policy and the transfers and the testimony of the lab technician and the phone records extracted under warrant from Lorna's device that showed a sustained, documented conversation with Travis Hale in the weeks leading up to the night Maisie drank the juice. Travis Hale was brought in within 48 hours of Lorna's arrest. He retained a lawyer and went quiet. The quiet did not help him. The financial records, the phone records, the testimony of people who had seen them together and could speak to the nature of the relationship. It was enough. Michael's first call to a family attorney came the same week. The custody filing was nearly a formality. There was nothing on the other side. Lorna was facing a serious sentence. Dolores had her own charges to manage. The filing went through on a timeline that was, by legal standards, swift. The house was the harder thing. Not emotionally, practically. It was in both their names, and untangling it required 3 months of negotiations that Michael handled through Dennis rather than directly. He sold it eventually. He did not need to live in a house where the refrigerator shelf still held the shape of what had been placed on it. He found a smaller place, 2 streets from Maisie's school. A rental while he looked for something permanent. It had a yard with a good tree, a big oak with branches that reached low and started wide. Maisie had spotted it from the car before they'd even pulled into the driveway. That one, she had said, pointing. The tree. I'm going to climb it. After we sign the lease, he said. She climbed it the same evening. Michael stood underneath with one hand slightly raised, not touching her, not needed, just there. She made it to the 3rd branch before she decided that was enough for today. Good enough, she said from above him. Not bad, he said. She climbed down, carefully dropped the last foot, and walked inside like it was something she did every day. The trial was not long by the standards of such things. Lorna's attorney argued coercion, that Travis Hale had initiated and orchestrated the plan, and that Lorna had been under his influence to a degree that diminished her culpability. The prosecution had the phone records. They had the insurance policy, signed by Lorna, without Travis's name anywhere on the document. They had testimony from the lab technician and from Brenda, the nurse, regarding what Lorna had asked at the desk. They had the recorded sequence of financial transfers and the timeline that placed them in precise correlation with the policy filing. The jury was not persuaded by the coercion argument. Lorna received 11 years. The possibility of parole at 7, with conditions the court considered carefully. Dolores received 4 years on the conspiracy and accessory charges. Her attorney argued limited direct involvement and cited her age. The judge noted both. The sentence still stood. Travis Hale received 8 years. The conspiracy charge held, and an additional financial fraud count tied to the insurance policy and the transferred funds added to the total. He sat at his defense table throughout the reading with his hands folded and his eyes forward in an expression of perfect blankness, which Michael observed from across the courtroom without any particular emotion. Dennis called Michael after each verdict. Brief, factual updates, delivered in the calm voice of a man who had done this many times and understood that information delivered without flourish is information that can be used. Michael received each one. He noted them. He moved on. Months later, the house was quiet in the way Michael had learned to like. Not the quiet of something missing. That had been the early weeks, when the rooms felt stripped and strange, and every surface seemed to hold the outline of something that used to be there. This was different. A settled quiet. The kind that accumulates slowly, like a room finding its shape. A Saturday in November. Clean light coming through the kitchen windows in flat, honest angles. Maisie was at the table, working with the focused seriousness she brought to any task she considered worthwhile. She had a set of markers, 16 of them. She had counted them aloud before opening the pack and announced the number as though it were significant, and she was drawing something large and careful on a sheet of paper that she kept adjusting. Michael was at the counter making sandwiches. The unhurried, Saturday kind of sandwich making, where you take your time and don't cut corners. Daddy, yeah. She didn't look up from the paper. She made a careful stroke with a blue marker. Mom's not coming back, right? Michael set down the bread knife. He crossed the kitchen and crouched beside her chair, getting down her level the way he always did when something needed to be said clearly between them. Not standing over her. Beside her. No, he said. She's not. Maisie looked at him. Her expression was still and careful. Not blank. There was a lot moving behind her eyes, the way there always was. She was a child who thought more than she said. He had noticed it early and had been careful never to rush her. Okay, she said. Just that. She looked back at her drawing. With great deliberateness, she selected an orange marker from the row and uncapped it. Is the tree still mine? She asked. He looked at her. Something in the question, the absolute ordinary weight of it, the way children make home out of whatever is in reach, caught him somewhere he hadn't expected. All yours, he said. Even in winter? Especially in winter. She nodded, satisfied with this, and drew an orange tree in the center of her paper. Michael straightened. He stood beside her chair for a moment, looking at the drawing. A tree with round orange branches and a thick trunk, and, in the upper corner, a yellow sun that she had added with a separate marker, tilting as slightly like suns do in children's drawings, as though the sun prefers a relaxed angle. He went back to the sandwiches. He had worked construction for 15 years. He knew how things were built, and he knew how they failed, and he knew that what you were left with after failure was never nothing. It was always something if you knew how to look at it. Sometimes a foundation, sometimes one solid wall. He had saved his daughter. That was the wall he had kept. Everything else, the betrayal laid out in careful steps, the scheme drawn up around a child's life as though her life were a problem to be managed. All of it had its place. Filed, permanent, not forgiven, not forgotten, not softened at the edges by time or by the generous rounding off that some people called moving forward. He did not need that. He did not want it. What had been done was exactly what it was, and he was not the kind of man who looked away from accurate information. But he did not carry it the way a burden is carried. He carried it the way a scar is carried. Present, part of the structure, a record of something true that did not require daily attention to remain true. He cut the sandwiches and put them on 2 plates. He carried both to the table and set one in front of Maisie. She looked up briefly from her drawing, assessed the sandwich, and returned to the drawing. He sat across from her and ate. After a while, she put down the orange marker and picked up the sandwich and ate half of it in 3 bites with the focused efficiency of a child who has decided to eat and means to finish quickly. Then she put it down and went back to the drawing. When do trees get their leaves back? She asked. March, maybe. April. That's forever. It sounds longer than it is. She considered this. How do you know? Because I've been through a lot of winters. She looked at him over the drawing with an expression that considered whether this was sufficient evidence. Then she returned to her work, apparently satisfied. After lunch, she wanted to go outside. She put on her coat herself, the puffy orange one, because she liked orange, which was why the tree in the drawing had orange leaves, which was, she had informed him some weeks ago, perfectly realistic because leaves do turn orange. And she went out to the yard. Michael watched through the kitchen window. She went straight to the tree. She put both hands on the bark and examined the lower branches with the seriousness of a structural assessment, moving from side to side and testing each branch with a push before she trusted it. Then she began to climb. She made it to the fourth branch this time, one higher than before. She sat up there in the bare November tree, in her orange coat against the gray sky, and she looked at the yard below her with complete composure, as though she were exactly where she was supposed to be. After a moment, she turned and found the window and found him standing in it. She raised one hand. He raised his. She turned back to the yard. He could see her talking, though he could not hear the words. Some running account of what she could see from up there, delivered to no one in particular, the way she did when she was pleased with something. He stood at the window and watched her for a while. He did not forgive what had been done to her. He was not going to. That was not the kind of man he was, and he had stopped apologizing for the kind of man he was a long time ago. Some things were not meant to be forgiven. Some things were meant to be carried accurately, with clear eyes, so that you always knew exactly what had happened and what it had cost. What had cost him was a marriage that had never been what he thought it was. What it had given back to him was sitting in a bare oak tree in November, wearing an orange coat, narrating the neighborhood to herself in a voice he could not hear through the glass. That was enough. That had always been more than enough.